Jesus said this Aramaic word every morning. The frequency that rewires your day every morning. Before the world knew his name, Jesus woke in the dark and spoke a single word into the silence. Not a prayer with many words, not a ritual with incense or ceremony. One Aramaic word spoken deliberately, with full breath, full awareness, full intention. That word carried a vibrational frequency that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to measure and confirm. It did not ask for anything. It opened everything. There is a pattern hidden in plain sight across the Gospel accounts that most readers pass over without a second thought. In the Gospel of Mark, in Luke, and in the earliest Aramaic manuscripts preserved outside the canonical tradition, Jesus is described rising a great while before day, withdrawing to solitary places, not simply to pray in the way we have come to understand prayer, but to do something far more specific. Scholars of Aramaic, particularly those working with the Peshitta, the ancient Aramaic version of the New Testament, have noted that the word translated simply as prayer in Greek and later in English does not carry the full weight of the original Aramaic term used in those early texts. The Aramaic word at the root of what Jesus practiced in those early morning hours is closer, in meaning, to a conscious alignment. A tune-in of the inner instrument of the human mind and body to a frequency already present in the fabric of creation. The ancient Aramaic cosmology held that sound was not merely symbolic, but generative, that spoken words, particularly those spoken with kavarna, meaning focused sacred intention, produced measurable effects in the material world. Jesus did not simply believe this intellectually. He practiced it at the threshold of every single day. What has been passed down through centuries of translation and theological interpretation has been gradually stripped of its vibrational dimension. The Greek translators who worked to bring the Aramaic teachings into the Hellenistic world had no equivalent vocabulary for the physics of sound as the Aramaic tradition understood it. What remained in translation was the shape of the practice, rising early speaking words. But the specific frequency, the specific word, the specific physiological protocol that accompanied it was left behind in the manuscripts that the mainstream tradition rarely examined. And yet that word survived. It was preserved not in the creeds or the doctrines, but in the living oral tradition of Aramaic Christian communities in Syria, in the high desert monasteries, and in the mystical branches of the tradition that kept the original sound alive, because they understood that the sound itself was the teaching. The word itself, Shahar, and the dawn frequency, the word, is Shahar. In ancient Aramaic, Shahar means dawn, but it means something far more precise than the English word suggests. Shahar is the exact moment of transition between total darkness and the first imperceptible movement of light, not sunrise, not morning, but the precise threshold where one state gives way to another. In Aramaic cosmology, that threshold was understood to be the most energetically charged moment of the 24-hour cycle, the moment when the veil between the visible and invisible worlds was thinnest, the moment when a spoken word could travel furthest. Jesus, who lived within the full depth of the Aramaic spiritual tradition, would have understood Shahar not as a time marker but as a state of consciousness. The neuroscience of sleep cycles now gives us a parallel language for this. In the transition from deep delta wave sleep to waking consciousness, the brain passes through a brief but extraordinary window of theta wave activity, the same brainwave state associated with deep hypnosis, accelerated learning, and heightened neuroplasticity. Ancient practitioners did not have EEG machines, but they mapped this territory through centuries of careful inner observation, and they built their most important practices around it. Shahar was the name they gave to that window. To speak the word Shahar at Shahar, to name the threshold while standing at the threshold, was understood in the Aramaic tradition as a form of the spoken frequency of the word and the frequency of the moment were designed to resonate together, creating a field effect in the body and mind of the practitioner that would persist through the hours ahead. It is the equivalent, in modern terms, of calibrating an instrument before a performance or setting an intention before a meditation. But unlike modern intention setting, the Aramaic practice was rooted in the understanding that the word itself carries the frequency, that the vibration of Shah, spoken in the human voice at the moment of dawn, literally rewires the neural patterns that govern how the day unfolds. Imagine beginning your journey with the two most powerful Aramaic words that open everything: a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol exists for those who feel the call. Check the pinned comment. What frequency does to the human brain? The science of how spoken sound changes. The brain has advanced dramatically in the last 2 decades. And what researchers have discovered aligns with startling precision to what the Aramaic tradition described in entirely different language. When a specific phoneme, a unit of sound, is spoken aloud with deliberate breath and focused attention, it produces vibrations that travel not only through the air but through the body of the speaker, the bones of the skull, the fluid of the inner ear. The tissue of the throat and chest all resonate with the produced sound. This internal resonance has measurable effects on the autonomic nervous system, on cortisol levels, on the regulation of the vagus nerve, and on the default mode network of the brain. The phonemes in Shahar, the sh sound, the al vowel, and the rolling r are not arbitrary. The sh sound, classified in linguistics as a fricative, produces a sustained high-frequency vibration in the upper palate and the nasal cavity that stimulates the olfactory nerve, which has a direct pathway to the amygdala and hippocampus. The brain has centers of emotional memory and threat response. Speaking sh repeatedly or with extended duration has been shown to down-regulate the stress response in ways that parallel the effect of extended exhale breathing in somatic therapy. Tia sound, which appears at the center of Shahar, is one of the most physiologically open vowel sounds the human mouth produces. It requires dropping the jaw, opening the throat, and releasing tension from the muscles of the face. Every tradition that works with sacred chant, Vedic, Hebrew, Tibetan, early Christian, places the a vowel at the center of its most powerful invocations. The r at the end of Shahar, rolled or trilled in its original Aramaic pronunciation, creates a low-frequency vibration in the chest that engages the vagus nerve directly. Vagal tone. The responsiveness of this nerve is now understood to be one of the primary physiological markers of resilience, emotional regulation, and cognitive flexibility. When vagal tone is high, humans make better decisions, recover faster from stress, and maintain clearer perception. Jesus, practicing Shahar at dawn every morning, was not performing a ritual in the empty religious sense. He was physiologically preparing his nervous system for the work that lay ahead. If you feel drawn to go further, a guide already exists, the 2 most important Aramaic words that symbolize the beginning of everything. Correct sound, full meaning, and a sacred protocol for those 2 words. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. The canonical Gospels give us the outline of Jesus' practice, but not the specific content of what he spoke in those solitary predn hours. For that, we must turn to the texts that the mainstream tradition set aside, not because they are less authentic, but because they operate in a different register, one that requires the reader to be already initiated into the understanding that language, in the Aramaic tradition, functions on multiple levels simultaneously. The Gospel of Thomas, preserved in Coptic but widely understood by scholars to contain an Aramaic source layer that predates the Synoptic Gospels, contains several logia, individual sayings, that refer to the practice of speaking at the moment of transition between states. Logion 50 of Thomas speaks of movement and rest of light, arising in light, of the chosen ones being called to recognize their origin through a gesture of standing before the Father in the moment of stillness and motion, simultaneously. Aramaic scholars who have worked with the Thomas texts note that the language describing this standing is the same root, language used elsewhere to describe the pre-dawn practice of alignment. The Peshitta manuscripts, which were maintained and transmitted by the Assyrian Church of the East, whose liturgical language remained Aramaic for centuries, contain rubrics small and notes that describe specific phonemic practices to be performed at specific times of day. The pre-dawn rubrics consistently center on words related to dawn, to opening, to the release of the sealed, and to the beginning of movement from stillness. What emerges from this cross-referencing is not speculation but pattern. The same vibrational vocabulary appears across the Gospel of Thomas, the Peshitta traditions, the liturgical texts of the early Syriac Church, and in the Aramaic, which is not merely a mourner's prayer, but in its earliest form a declaration of the sanctity of the name spoken at the threshold of transition. Shahara appears and reappears at every threshold, and the teachers who preserved these traditions did so because they understood that the word was not merely descriptive of the dawn. It was functional. It produced the dawn, the inner dawn, in whoever spoke it at the outer dawn. Jesus knew this, because he lived it. And he rose before the world woke, so that the frequency of his voice could meet the frequency of the turning moment undisturbed. How to receive the frequency of Shahar Taditha, practice Jesus engaged with every morning, is available to anyone who approaches it with the correct understanding of what it is and what it is not. It is not a magic formula that produces results without the engagement of the whole person. It is not a substitute for action, discernment, or the deeper transformation that the full body of Jesus' teachings points toward. It is a physiological and spiritual calibration, a way of beginning the day already aligned with the deepest frequency of who you are and what you are here to do. And the protocol, while simple, must be approached with precision, because the sound is the practice, and an approximate sound produces an approximate result. The first element is timing. Shahar is not a word to be spoken at 7 a.m. after coffee and email. Its power is specifically calibrated to the transition window, the period beginning roughly 40 minutes before the sun crosses the horizon and ending at the moment of first light. This is not arbitrary mysticism. It corresponds precisely to the theta wave window of neurological transition described earlier. The brain is most receptive, most plastic, most open to repatterning during this window. And the tradition preserved this understanding in the form of the word Shahar itself, which names the moment so that the practitioner cannot mistake it. The second element is breath. In the Aramaic tradition, a word spoken without the full engagement of the breath is a word spoken at half its frequency. The practice involves a complete inhale through the nose, filling the lower abdomen first, then to chest, followed by the spoken word on a full, slow exhale. The SH is extended. The ARE is opened completely, dropping the jaw and releasing the throat. The R is rolled gently at the end, not cut off, allowed to dissolve into silence rather than stopped. The third element is repetition. The tradition indicates that the word should be spoken 7 times at minimum, with full attention on the vibrational sensation in the body with each repetition. Not on the meaning intellectually, not on a desired outcome, but on the felt sense of the frequency moving through the chest, the throat, the skull. This is the morning practice. Jesus returned to every day of his ministry, not because he needed it, but because it is what alignment requires of anyone who lives in a human body and chooses to move through the world with full intention. There is a reason Jesus rose before dawn. There is a reason he withdrew to solitary places and spoke before the noise of the world began. It was not only devotion in the way religion has framed devotion, it was precision. The precision of a being who understood that the human instrument requires daily calibration, and that the optimal moment for that calibration is the threshold between night and day, between the sleeping mind and the waking one, between the world as it was and the world as it is becoming. The word Shahar encodes an entire cosmology in a single sound. It names the moment, activates the physiology, aligns the nervous system, and carries a vibrational frequency that the Aramaic tradition understood, and that modern neuroscience is now rediscovering to be one of the most powerful, influencing forces available to a human being. Jesus did not keep this practice secret because it was too dangerous to share. The Gospels tell us plainly that he went to solitary places. The tradition preserved in the Peshitta and the Thomas texts tells us what he did there. What was hidden was not the practice, but the dimension of the practice that translation erased. You do not need a church to practice Shahar. You do not need a degree in Aramaic linguistics. You need willingness to rise at the threshold, to breathe fully, to speak the word with your whole body, and to give the frequency enough silence to do what it was designed to do. 7 repetitions. Full breath, full sound, full attention. The same practice that prepared Jesus for every healing, every teaching, every confrontation with power, every moment of clarity in the wilderness. The same frequency that was woven into the fabric of the ancient world and preserved across 2,000 years for this moment, for those who are ready to receive it. The dawn happens every morning without your permission. Shahar, the practice, asks only that you be present when it does. Everything begins with 2 Aramaic words, a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol is now available for those ready to start this journey. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. Subscribe to the channel, Hibi it a like, and write in the comments what you thought of this content.